getting through to you.
That's Kiely Connell getting through with the opening track to her new album, My Own Company. It's Kylie's second record and the first she's made with producer Tucker Martine, a fact she's quite happy about.
Plastered your face on glossy pages, you felt famous, stirring up.
I have been a fan of his work for a really long time. I'm a huge Nico Case fan. And she put out a record called The Worse Things Get, The Harder I Fight, the more I love you. And that record to me meant a lot to me.
Right.
And there's a couple songs on it, I think, where you can really tell that the production is shining, you know?
Uh-huh.
There's a song called Nearly Midnight in Honolulu where it's basically a cappella and she's kind of chanting the whole thing. And I kept thinking, the production on this is really unique and really clever for a song that's very stripped. And I thought that was really impressive to me.
Yeah.
And then I went and I looked at all of his other discography and I saw he's worked with basically most of my favorite artists of the last, or at least like a couple decades. So in my mind, he was the guy that I wanted to work with. I just never thought I would get to.
Right.
And then 30 Tigers approached me and they said, well, you know, we're thinking about doing something a little bit less Nashville for you, something a little more unique.
Uh-huh.
What would you think about Tucker Martine? And I was like, that's an option.
There you go.
So I sent him the demos and he basically immediately responded that he wanted to work with me. And we scheduled a phone call. And on the call, we talked for like 2 hours. It was a great call. We just talked about musical influences and his studio's in Portland, Oregon. So we
Right.
talked about the show Portlandia and Fred Armisen and just all these things. And it became immediately clear, like, man, no wonder I've had it in my mind for over the last decade that this guy was my guy that I should work with. And it was like, I was right. Because
Right.
we formed this bond so quickly. And it's just working with him was incredible. And I feel like the album shows that. And he still to this day is a very close friend of mine. So I hope that that continues for the rest of my life. But who knows? You never know.
That's true. So you recorded in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So does it make a difference, the geographical location, or is it more the people around that influence how the recording for you?
I think it's definitely the people around. I just knew that I wanted to work with Tucker for so long, and then he brought in Nate Query from the Decemberists, who I love the Decemberists, and
their new album is awesome, huh?
yeah, I mean, all of their albums are on. Like I love the Decemberists. I've loved them forever. And when he told me, Tucker and I were talking about Players, about this was probably actually pretty close to when I went in, because I think for a while we weren't sure if we were needing to push back the studio time. And he said, well, how would you feel about Nate from the Decemberists playing bass on it? And I was like, well, obviously, obviously I would love that. And then he said, and I'm thinking Andy Borger, who's played drums with, you know, Tom Waits and Nora Jones, to play percussion. And I was like, yeah, that'll be just fine with me.
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the guy who kind of does a lot of the heavy lifting on the playing is Drew Cole. So
Drew Cole, yeah. Yes. So Drew has been my longtime musical companion. He played a lot on my first record. He plays almost every instrument you can think of. And what I love the most about Drew is that, you know, there's a million players out there that are really talented. But what Drew is, in addition to being really talented, is he's very thoughtful. And he's also a songwriter himself. So when he comes up with these instrumentation on all of these different instruments, it always fits so perfectly into the song that you've written because he thinks like a songwriter. And that's a really unique gift.
Right. Now, there's a couple songs I wanted to touch on. One of them being "On the Mind," which, because of this,
On the Mend.
oh, sorry, yes, I can't read my own writing. It's terrible.
Okay.
I do it like in every interview. I write all these notes and can't see. But anyway, "On the Mend," yes, which is, I think, an excellent example of the storytelling that you incorporate into your songwriting. And it's a good rocker as well, so that's always a plus. But I'm just wondering if we can use that as a jumping off point to talk about how you approach your lyrics.
I just pulled off of the roadside after feeling overwhelmed. The last few hundred miles been wearing this old girl out. I was running away from heartache and it finally tracked me down. As I was staring at my cowboy boots in another rust belt town.
I wrote that song after it's in basically every interview I've done, but I had a big life transition happen where I ended an 8-year-long relationship, and that was really hard. And I
Yep.
spent my first holiday season alone. That you hear about that on Anesthesia, and
Yep.
then I did a tour alone. And that's when I started writing On the Mend. I kind of was standing there in January in Iowa at this icy gas station, and I started penning that. And then I got back to Nashville and I wanted to keep the ball rolling on it. And I knew that my time was kind of running a little bit short. So I contacted a good friend of mine who he and I have weekly music collaboration sessions. His name is Guthrie Brown. And Guthrie and I sat down and we finished the song that I had started and just been sitting on forever. So that was a really great feeling. Wanted to have that Springsteen type of a vibe, and
Well, even when you were telling me
I
about
think
the icy the
mhm.
gas station and all that, suddenly my mind's going to something from Bruce in the '80s there. So yeah, Darkness on the
It's
Edge of
funny.
Town or something.
I've learned there's weirdly a lot of weird overlap with Bruce and I, that we both play Takamine guitars, which is kind
Huh?
of rare. Not
Right?
that many people do. And he could play any guitar that he wants, and he still plays a
Yeah.
Takamine. So that kind of says a lot, I think. And then we're both really, we both come from these kind of more hardworking, blue collar kind of places. And it's just been kind of interesting that I didn't always start off as the biggest Springsteen fan, but probably over the last 6 years, I've really, really been digging it.
Cool. Well, another person that came to my mind when I was listening to listening to the track "Beautiful," which seems to me kind of the showcase track of the album, was Roseanne Cash. I don't know if you get that
Oh,
comparison
yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Bade you for innocence is now worn by a quarterback, like a letter on his sweater. Just to know that you're beautiful, gentle and kind and so beautiful. You're such an angelic soul. Pay no mind to what they say, they don't know.
I've had one person say that, a good friend of mine, when I first started putting out music, probably around the time of my first record, I guess, because for so long I had just been, I don't know, I was very skeptical of whether or not the music industry was still something that would work and if it would support me and all of those things. And I just
And
kind of
rightly
was like,
so, because
you know?
everybody's struggling.
Exactly. So I'm glad that I did take that leap because I feel like people have absolutely proven me wrong and people have shown up for me in a beautiful way. But she
Yeah.
was the first person who gave me the Roseanne Cash comparison, and
Oh, nice.
that's a
Well,
great
obviously
one.
she's correct.
That's an honor. Yeah.
It's not bad. And what can you tell me about the song itself? Beautiful.
About Beautiful. So
Yeah.
Beautiful actually took years to finish. I wrote that with a very good friend of mine, and she and I have worked on a lot of different songs together over the years. A woman named Lisa Day.
Right.
And Lisa and I had this idea about, the physical beauty for a woman. There's just such a big emphasis put on it. And there's all of this pressure, and you get to a certain age and you feel like you're invisible all of a sudden. And it seems like that's so backwards because actually, with everything that you go through and all of your wisdom, and I see it as such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So I thought it was just an interesting thing to kind of deconstruct and bring attention to that. And over the years, we kept writing and rewriting, and I'd be like, I don't like this line, it's not right, I don't want it to seem too cheesy or too contrived. And then we'd go back and we'd rewrite it. And I think probably several years ago there's got to be some early recordings of me recording it with different verses in
Right, right,
there.
right, right.
Hmm.
All right.
But I
So,
think what we ended up with is a really beautiful, beautiful track. I'm very proud of it.
and it's followed by Damn Hands, which kind of makes, they're kind
Mhm.
of part of the same story. Would you agree?
Get your damn hands off of me. Get your damn hands off of me. I'm done being nice, so I'm saying it twice. Get your damn hands off of me.
I would agree, certainly, because again, it's this message of, a woman's physical beauty again. And also just the idea that it's strange somehow we're in this era where we're talking more and more about the idea of consent and just boundaries, but it still seems to be an issue where people just expect things of you.
Right.
If you have a 5 minute long conversation with them, they expect, like, oh, well, maybe I get to go home with you tonight. And that's strange to me. I've certainly never felt that way
Right.
after 5 minutes.
I see. But it's interesting about the consent and the boundaries. And now I'm going to kind of touch on something that may be a little bit sensitive. So I know that one of your inspirations is Neil Gaiman, and I
Mhm.
know that he's been kind of in the middle of some of that discussion as well. Some people have made some accusations about him. So does that feed into how you now think about his art?
Oh, so what's interesting is I hadn't seen that article until a couple days ago, and someone showed it to me, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Because truth be told, over the last couple years, I have been really working on trying to separate the artist from the art.
Yep, yep,
And it's a hard thing to do.
yeah,
At the end of the day, obviously, I don't agree with non-consensual touching or non-consensual acts. Um, that also doesn't take away the fact that I've read more of his books than any other author.
yep.
It's just the way that he writes says something to me. But I've never met him as a person.
Hmm.
So,
Yep, there
you
you go.
know,
That's
I certainly don't agree with that. I think the song speaks pretty highly of or strongly about that.
right, right, right. Yes, his ex-wife Amanda Palmer has played up in this room here, because they got stuck in New Zealand here a few years ago during the pandemic and ended up living here for 3 years. So
Mhm.
her and her child.
Gosh, and she's the coolest.
Yeah,
Amanda
exactly.
Palmer is so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have seen it coming with
No,
his
no.
marriage with her. the way that he writes, but you know, you never do know.
Yep,
You
yep.
don't.
That is true. You got to keep your antenna up all the time. So I noticed that all of the songs are co-writes, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I've been talking to a lot of people in Nashville, and I kind of threw that out to somebody else, and they were like, "Oh, well, of course, because in Nashville, it's a co-writing. That's what everybody does." So is that your answer too? Is that the way it works? Yeah.
Um, Sometimes two of the songs on the record are solo writes. I
Right.
wrote Through to You and Anesthesia alone, but
Yeah.
the rest of them, yeah, most of the time, I think every person does it differently. I think a lot of the top charting artists go into writing rooms, which I think is kind of a different thing. A lot of us that have been in town for longer and are doing kind of more of a singer-songwriter thing are mainly, I mean, I'm usually only writing with one of my friends,
Mhm.
you know, which I think is a little bit different than going into a room with like four or five other people.
Yeah, definitely.
But it certainly is in the culture, and I have to say, there sometimes someone will bring a certain chord to the table that you wouldn't have thought, that I think is great because it sort of gets you out of your box creatively. Because let's face it, I mean, a lot of what made the Beatles so great is that sure, Paul would write a song or John would write a song, but it was a collaborative effort. It
Yep, yep,
always
yep,
was.
yep.
And I think that's what made the music so incredible, so timeless, and every album truly has its own feel and its own statement. And I think there's something to be said about that,
Hmm.
the power of collaboration.
All right, all right. Now, I got to admit that this is my first time hearing you on this album, and the first thing I heard when Through to You, the first song came up, was that you had a very distinctive and powerful voice. And I'm wondering when you discovered that about yourself, and if what is your relationship with your singing voice? Do you have to take care of it? Does it change? Do you think about how it evolves, how you present it?
I think it, yeah, I think it certainly has changed over the years. Absolutely. I've been singing my entire life.
Uh,
So my mother was a professional singer. I started off singing in competitive choir. I sang in church. I've done musical theater. I've done just about everything. I've done, you know, the 4-hour bar gigs where you have to be a human jukebox and you have to sing every genre. Like, I've
right.
done it, you know?
Yep.
But what's interesting is when I go back and I listen to myself singing, like in my early 20s or, um, you know, earlier than that, you really hear how much your voice changes.
Uh-huh.
And a part of that could just be life, and the way that you want to interpret a certain thing will make you want to sing it differently with different emotion.
All righty. And you also studied theater in college and did some acting. Does
Mhm.
that inform what you do as a musician and as a performer?
I think so. Absolutely. I think that's how I tried to set up my whole record, as I wanted it to be a story for
Okay.
people. If
Yeah.
you listen the whole way through, you know, I think a lot of people will notice there are key stories that happen throughout the whole record. And interestingly enough, I also read that Bruce Springsteen does that. He
Oh, well, there
looks
you go.
at each, yes, he looks at each side of the record, which is exactly what I did. And again, I didn't know that he did this. And I was
Uh-huh.
explaining it to a friend of mine who is a huge Springsteen fan. And he goes, well, you know, Springsteen does that. Because I guess what he does is he looks at a record as like bookends. This
Right.
is what you want to start it with, and this is what you want to end the first side with. And then we start the second side and we end the second side. And it's got to be like two books that you're putting together, you know, or maybe part one and part two of a book.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's worked for Bruce. He just announced he's been a billionaire. It's like,
Oh
holy
my
mackerel.
gosh. Honestly, I'm shocked that he wasn't already.
It's just mind blowing that amount of money, though.
I mean, it is mind-blowing, but it's like when you think about all the things he's done for as long as he's been doing it, I'm kind of like, man, I'm actually kind of surprised it wasn't sooner.
Yep. I think it's like him and Taylor Swift and Paul McCartney or something are in the one.
Gosh. I mean, Taylor Swift, talk about, I mean, that's fast.
Yep.
Bruce has been at it for how many decades?
Right. So,
Wow, it's crazy.
did you take any notice of Taylor's rise and what she did with her career?
You know, I feel like I've just always been so removed from it. There's not a whole lot of pop music that I really listen to. If I do, it's usually very theatrical,
Right.
obviously, with my background.
Yeah.
So people like I always have been familiar with Lady Gaga. A lot of people like that who have more of a theatrical flair to them are the ones that I gravitate towards. But I mean, I think it's great. Congratulations to her, you know? It's like
Sure.
I don't have to buy the records to think that it's great. Like, hey, great. Other people are buying them. I think it's great. Congratulations, you know?
Yep. And these days, of course, probably most of the money is generated from the big tours. So, do you feel a pressure to keep on the road and touring a lot to keep the money rolling in?
I mean, that pressure is certainly there, and you want to do it. It has to make financial sense. You've got to be making a certain amount per show to be able to justify being on the road, and then also to have to pay your bills at home.
Yeah.
So it's such a tricky balance, you know? But
Yeah.
I think we're all always hoping to be out there as often as we can to keep that ball rolling.
Well, at least now you have some cool vinyl to sell at the merch table, which is where the
Yeah,
big bucks are. So,
I'm very excited.
do you have a turntable?
I do. I don't have a great turntable. I
Doesn't
just have one
matter.
of those tiny little costly record players, but at least I have one.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Well, it must have been exciting to play it for the first time when you kind of stepped in.
It was. It was. I remember the first time I got to listen to one of the test pressings, and I couldn't believe that I finally was hearing my music on vinyl. It just was something that I always wanted.
Excellent. All righty. Well, thank you very much for telling me all this stuff, and thanks for making the record. It's a beauty. Good luck with. Come on down to. Have you ever been down to this part of the world? To New Zealand,
No,
Australia?
I would love to. I
Uh,
have a friend, actually, one of my best friends moved there, so I've got
uh,
to come visit him.
Obviously, that's true. And we've got a pretty cool, believe it or not, Americana scene down here. We have several people who have migrated from Canada and the U.S. who make great records down here, and some homegrown stuff as well.
Wow.
So lots to
That's
explore.
That's what I heard. I heard it's wonderful, so I can't wait to come.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.